Hey guys, my name is Cade Bonsall, and once again I'm joined by my friend Andrew Duvall, and this is our review for Don't Worry, Darling from 2022. So, Andrew, what did you think of the movie?
Joking aside, this is kind of a hard one for me to give a description of and to decide whether or not I like it because the last half hour, 45 minutes, I actually quite enjoyed where the plot finally picks up. But my God, the first 75 minutes of this movie is a slog where scenes don't really end, they just sort of stop and then they're never mentioned again and stuff is never referenced again. Positives: production design, costume design, lighting, cinematography, fantastic for this movie. Acting, passable to great. I thought Florence Pugh and Chris Pine did the absolute best. Nice to see Chris Pine as a villain and Florence Pugh as somebody who is clearly losing a grasp on her reality. I thought did a good job. Olivia Wilde was decent. Harry Styles was passable, but again, considering the fact this is like his first leading man role, I'm going to cut him some slack for that. Soundtrack, thoroughly enjoyed the kind of 50s, 60s soundtrack, but my God, the editing in this movie. This seriously, this movie could easily be like a 45-minute episode of Black Mirror or something of that ilk because there's just scene after scene after scene for the first almost hour and a half where just next to nothing happens.
Yeah, no, I can see what you mean, but yeah, but first I'll get my positives out. So I really love the cinematography, like you said. I liked the costume and production design. The color palette was really nice too. So yeah, I mean, it looked beautiful. For the most part, I thought the acting was good. I thought Florence Pugh really did carry the movie. Chris Pine, I thought, gave a good performance. Olivia Wilde was decent as well. You know, the first time that I did watch this, I did consider Harry Styles' performance rather bad, but watching it again, I wouldn't say he gave a bad performance. I think it's just a little bit more underwhelming because it felt as though he didn't really give enough emotion to his role. There were moments where he did sound really invested in putting on a performance, but most of the time it just seemed, again, just so underwhelming. And again, this was his first major role in a movie, so I'll give him a pass for that. Otherwise, in terms of the overall plot of the movie, this movie just feels very convoluted, to say the least, because we move on from one scene to the next. We have Alice figuring out that something might be going on. She experiences weird things happening, but she just kind of brushes them off, and we're not really sure what they mean and what they have to do with the whole plot of the movie. I mean, you see a scene of her crushing eggs, and just like that, we move on to the next scene like it was nothing. We see one scene where the window closes in on her, and it's weird, but she just kind of moves on from it after that, and that's just what it is throughout the whole movie. What did you think?
I was going to bring up that exact thing with the window. It's like, I mean, thinking about it, you could maybe make the interpretation of, oh, that's she's trying to push the boundaries of this world she's stuck in and the world's pushing back. But at that point in the movie, you don't have that information. The fact that it A happens, the fact that there's B, it's never referenced again, and the fact that C, she basically just moves on from it as if it was a fly on her shoulder, really just makes this movie have such a, again, it's a slog for the first 75 minutes. From like the dinner scene afterwards, like the last 45 minutes of the movie where everything starts getting explained, I did actually thoroughly enjoy, but oh God, just this running through the mud kind of just slow drag for the first good chunk of the movie.
Yeah, and I also felt that a lot of scenes were longer than they needed to be. You know, that little montage that we talked about where she's walking through the desert, like I mentioned when we were watching it, okay, we get it. She's out in the middle of nowhere. Can we move on from that? And the scenes where she's dancing, those scenes kind of felt tacked on, and a lot of other scenes as well. Also the extended moment where, Harry Styles is just dancing on stage. I think that just felt really dragged out and just not necessary. But also, there were a lot of questions I had during the movie that felt unanswered when we find out that the whole thing has actually been a virtual reality nonetheless. We find out that Harry Styles' character Jack has been coming and going with her, and he's been going out trying to make money for them. But my question is, the whole time they had said that he was unemployed in the real world, so he was just able to go get a job or jobs anywhere. Him being unemployed just wasn't a thing anymore. Also, I think another question I had was Alice's character, played by Florence Pugh, she's a surgeon, in the real world. So my question is, if that's the case, then wouldn't people have known that she went missing? That seems like a kind of job that would make people would probably question if you went missing. And I also had a question about how, if you remember, in the virtual world, only men could die, but not women. So I'm not entirely sure how that works, and they didn't really explain it. But yeah, the movie just gave me so many questions that were left unanswered, and that just makes me look at this a little just not as fondly as I was hoping to, because for the most part, I thought the premise of this movie was interesting and it could have been interesting, but the execution just wasn't very well done, in my opinion. I don't know if you feel the same way.
I do. And honestly, I feel like something I think would have been a nice touch at the end if they could have cut out, 15, 20 minutes of this movie and added it to the ending would have been showing all of these other people who were in the simulation in the real world, like what their situation was. Like they said that Olivia Wilde's character, Bunny, she was there of her own accord, but it kind of made it sound like her kids and husband were not. Obviously, Florence Pugh's character, Alice, she was there against her will. But another thing was they kind of just didn't really flesh out the villain's motives. They didn't really flesh out Chris Pine's motives because they said, oh, he's the one who came up with this simulation, but what was his reasoning? Yes, his wife kills him at the end too. And was that because she was there against her will and she kind of realized it? Or was this kind of like, were they even in a relationship in real life? Because they mentioned very briefly that when they're kind of doing the test for Harry Styles, like before he goes into the simulation, it's like, oh, chosen wife, this person, prior relationship established. That's kind of terrifying that you could have effectively kidnapped somebody and taken them into this world with you.
Yeah, exactly. I
But
agree.
so I think maybe like a 5 to 8 minute, just sort of not really montage, but just kind of showing all of what these other characters were doing in the real world that led them into this would have been, I think, a better way to end this rather than kind of just random dance sequence that really felt tacked on. So
No, yeah, I totally get what you mean. I also another thing that you bring up about Olivia Wilde's character Bunny, she's supposed to be, she claims at the end that she chose this world because it lets her be with her kids. And I mean, okay, that's interesting. That's understandable. But throughout the entire movie, we see her complaining about having children, and that kind of just takes away from the emotional impact that that scene and realization could have had. And it just made me care for her character a lot less for some reason. I mean, otherwise, I thought Olivia Wilde did fine. I don't think there was necessarily, for the most part, I thought the performances were good. But again, for the most part, I just found most of the characters in this movie uninteresting. I thought Alice could have been a lot more interesting, but to the fact that she just keeps brushing off everything just made me lose interest in her because she wasn't thinking very logically. I mean, at times she might have been, but not for the most part. And Harry Styles' character Jack, I didn't find all that interesting. Bunny, I think, could have been played a lot better if they had redone her whole attitude toward her children. Again, Chris Pine gave a good performance, and I thought his character had that sort of compelling and mystique presence that you'd like a villain to have. But yeah, again, we don't know much about his character or his motivation except for the fact that he's the villain. And I don't know. I just that was just something that I didn't enjoy about the movie, and for the most part, made me not have such a great experience watching it. So I don't know. Did you feel the same way at all?
I do. I definitely agree. And another thing is this movie borrows heavily from a lot of different movies as well.
It kind of
Like I
does.
don't know if you noticed, there's definitely some elements of Get Out. There's some elements of The Village. There's some elements of, for crying out loud. Honestly, there's even like some elements of The Matrix, and for crying out loud, there's even some elements of WandaVision in there.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. And I think that's one of the biggest criticisms that this movie was faced with. There were people claiming that it was too similar to Get Out, like you said, and The Village. And that's honestly how I thought the movie was going to go. I will say this though, it did surprise me with what the reveal was, how instead of, because I thought it was going to be this massive cult that the project was, that Chris Pine's character Frank was the leader of this sort of society, if you want to call it that, and that this was a chance at a different life away from the real world. But instead, finding out that it was a simulation, I was genuinely surprised by, because I wasn't really expecting that. I think, I mean, it's not a bad reveal, don't get me wrong, but I do think it could have been handled or portrayed a little better, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I just again, this one's kind of a really weird one for me to rank because again, there's parts of it I really did like. There was parts of it that really I did not like, and again it borrows so much from other movies that honestly I feel did better. Like I would prefer to watch Get Out over this because I feel like Get Out had a lot better tension
Oh,
and
without a doubt. Yeah, of course.
it was a lot better script as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I would call this a bad movie, would you?
No, if I were to give it like a ranking out of 10, like we did for the Long Halloween, I'm gonna say between like a 6 and a 6.5. Because again, there was definitely parts of it I did really like, but just the fact that it took so long to really get going.
No, I agree. Yeah, it did take a long time, and I mentioned that, with that moment when Chris Pine is at their house and she's chopping the food, and he comes in and tells her that, I've been waiting for someone to challenge me. I immediately started to get more interested. I thought, okay, that's interesting. But, like I mentioned when we were watching it, it took an hour and 13 minutes for there to actually be some conflict. And usually I don't have a problem with slow burn movies. I'm willing to sit in there and just try to wait it out and see when it gets interesting. But even though there is quite a bit happening throughout this most of the movie, it just really didn't feel like there was.
But yeah, but again, if you were again, parts of it I liked, other parts of it I really did not. So again, if I were to give it a rating, I would say anywhere from 6 to 6.5. What would you give it?
I think I'd give it a 5.5 or 6, because again, I did enjoy a lot of things, the cinematography, color palette, production design, the acting. And I don't know if I'd agree that the editing was bad. I thought parts of it were good, but yeah, again, I didn't like most of the characters that much, and the plot was just so convoluted. And I think the execution of the overall concept could have been done a lot better if it was handled a little more better, because they don't really build up to the reveal that well. They kind of just dump it on us at the end, and it just kind of felt that way. But no, again, I don't think it's necessarily a bad movie. It's just kind of underwhelming. And I do know that there was a lot of onset drama for this movie, which I'm sure you've heard about.
I have, yes.
Yeah, which we don't need to talk about in this review. All right, guys. Well, I think that's it for our review of Don't Worry, Darling from 2022. Thanks so much for watching us. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you guys later. Thanks.